Houston's largest international and independent film festival is almost here. The 16th annual Houston Cinema Arts Festival runs November 7th through the 17th, featuring over 40 unique film events, workshops, performances, and more. Just the first week, you can see the coming-of-age film Tendaberry, then the 30th anniversary screening of Reality Bites, and Swamp Dogg gets his pool painted with a performance from Swamp Dogg himself at the newly reopened River Oaks Theater. Get your all-access passes, which include all the screenings, performances, and exclusive parties at cinemahtx.org/HCAF. Single tickets are available too. November is the month to explore Pearland's dining scene with Pearland Restaurant Weeks. From Boiling Dragon's famous Dragon Seafood Fried Rice to your new favorite Chicken Fried Chicken at Magnolia Cajun Comfort, there's a Pearland restaurant to satisfy every palate. Support small and discover neighborhood gems in Pearland this fall with Pearland Restaurant Weeks running November 1st through the 30th. See the menus at visitpearland.com/restaurant weeks and start planning your weekend today. Today on CityCast Houston, it's the day after a historic election, and we're processing the results. Here to help me recap some of the biggest local and statewide races are Hey Houston newsletter editor Brooke Lewis and executive producer Laura Isensee. It's Wednesday, November 6th. I'm Rahil Ramzanali, and here's what Houston's talking about. Hey Laura, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Still working on my cup of coffee, but excited to dig into this with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brooke, good morning.
Good morning. Still wiping sleep out of my eyes, but ready to get into this.
Yeah, and let's jump right into it because Texas went for Donald Trump for a third straight time, with the former president beating Vice President Kamala Harris by a very comfortable double-digit margin here in Texas. Trump also won several key swing states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin to regain the White House and became the first president since Grover Cleveland to win non-consecutive terms. And his winning the presidency also highlighted some major wins in Texas, including another term for Senator Cruz, and just overall that Texas is still very much red.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a while before we see Texas turn purple or blue. I don't think it was expected this time around, but I think what's really interesting as we dig into the results more and get into the layers is that it looks like Trump won pretty big in the suburbs, and the margin for the Democrats was smaller this time around than it was in 2020. So I think there's going to be a lot to dig in here of how this vote broke down and, where the Democratic Party in Texas goes from here.
Yeah, agreed. And I think just the fact that Kamala Harris had a rally in Houston not that long ago, and there was talk about could Texas possibly turn blue or just look a little bit different this year. I just think I'm still processing alongside all of you guys, and I think it'll be a while before we figure out kind of what happened with this.
Yeah, and one race that was very interesting going in was between Colin Allred and Senator Ted Cruz, and that one did not turn out the way a lot of people predicted, Brooke.
Yeah, this race was closely watched, and these two candidates ended up raising $166 million, which was more than any Senate race in the country. Texas voters decided to re-elect Ted Cruz to the U.S. Senate for a third term. He has served in this position since 2013. Colin Allred, a congressman who currently represents Texas's 32nd district, would have been the first Democrat to win a U.S. Senate race in Texas since 1988. So it would have been a really huge deal for Democrats to secure this seat. But instead, Cruz will have a third term and probably gain more power in Washington. Both Trump and Cruz also appeared to win Texas by more than both of their last campaigns in the state, which is really interesting. And like I said, I think people are still trying to dig in and process those numbers.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be close like it was last time when Beto O'Rourke was taking on Senator Ted Cruz. And this was a blowout. There's no other way to put it. It was a blowout. And the turnout for Democrats in the strong urban stronghold for them was not there this time around. And it's going to be interesting to see as people dig into this and we learn more about what happened. But the turnout just was not there for Colin Allred.
Yeah, it really wasn't. And I just think, people are processing this. There was a lot of talk about the possibility of Allred taking this seat. And so the fact that it was a blowout, I think, is a surprise to many. And it's just going to take a minute for people to understand what exactly happened here.
One last thought on this race, I think is really interesting, both, and it kind of ties into, I think, some of the national, but here locally in Texas, I mean, the Latino vote is hugely important. And I think one thing behind Ted Cruz's success in getting a third term, despite being not a very popular person, even in his own party, is that he really won the Latino vote. Back when he was against Beto O'Rourke in 2018, he lost the Latino vote by double digits, 29 points. But this time around, he won the Latino vote by 6 points. So he, performed there. And, part of his message is resonating with some Latino voters, and that's proven really crucial here.
Yeah, it really has. All right, let's go to the HISD bond, Laura, because this was the historic bond. It was, not popular with either party. What happened with that one?
Yeah, well, here we had some really clear results really early on. And the big headline is that the HISD bond failed, with about 60% of early mail in and election day ballots cast going against these two propositions on the ballot. So, like you said, this was a historic bond. It was the biggest school bond proposal in Texas history at $4.4 billion. And with this no vote, it's the first time in Texas history that a bond over $1 billion has not passed. And it's been almost 30 years since HISD voters have rejected a bond. So this is a really big deal. And one of the big takeaways from this vote is that HISD schools that are in dire need of repair are going to have to wait longer to get those upgrades. But exactly how long isn't clear. The bond would have rebuilt or significantly upgraded about 36 schools. It would have improved security, expand pre-K, build new career and technical education centers, among other proposals. But I think, like you said, we had both parties, local Republicans, local Democrats, against this, plus a really large grassroots campaign from community advocates and parents going up against big business interests in Houston, saying, we don't trust the new state appointed superintendent. We can't vote for this.
Yeah, what did Superintendent Mike Miles say about the bond not passing? Because we asked him that when he was on here on CityCast Houston about what would it speak to your administration if this doesn't pass? But what did he say specifically after it failed?
It's really interesting because what he told us back in August, and what he put out last night are a little bit different. When he talked with us here on CityCast Houston, he said, yes, to some degree, if this bond fails, there is some reflection on the leadership, because leadership is accountable or responsible in part. But last night, the superintendent put out a statement saying that it's unfortunate that, quote unquote, politics of adults beat out the needs of our children. And he said that he can't promise that the aging infrastructure won't be a barrier to kids learning, but that, his administration is going to really keep schools safe. That's going to be their big priority. But you have to remember, Mike Miles has been appointed by the state. The Texas Education Agency took over HISD a year and a half ago. And since he's been in charge, he's implemented this new education system that's very unpopular. We've seen a lot of families leave the district. It's hemorrhaging principals and teachers. It's very unpopular. And so this grassroots campaign of community advocates and parents, they rallied around this slogan of no trust, no bond. And we clearly saw that at the ballot box.
Yeah, trust is the big issue here. And I wonder, if he came in and the community liked him and he was more accepting to certain things or just was nicer, I don't know, maybe things would be different, but that's not the case. So what now? What happens next?
I don't know if it's a question about like being nicer. I think really the call is people want more community input. They want to be heard and they want more transparency. And since voters have now rejected this bond, there's a few different options. A lot of people who didn't support it said, yes, we agree, including people who've been on our show, said, yes, we agree. The needs are there. The students deserve it. The teachers deserve it. We need to have safe and healthy learning environments, but this is not the right bond. So one option that people have said that could happen is that the HISD administration could go back to the drawing board. They could put together a different bond package, something that's smaller, more focused, and they can bring it back to voters. I mean, we have another election scheduled as early as May 2025. So that is potentially one option. But on the other side, those who were supporting this bond, including former HISD president Judith Cruz, who was on our show talking about it, said that that timing won't work, that this was a unique opportunity, and that honestly, too much money has already been invested to try and get this proposal before voters because they had to put money in to just get organized, do the analysis, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not really clear exactly what's going to be happening. Obviously, we're going to be following it here at CityCast Houston. I guess, again, going back to sort of the very specific reality is that some of these repairs at these school buildings are pretty dire. So HISD hasn't had a bond in over 10 years. School districts usually have these every 5 years in big cities like Houston. So it's not clear really how much longer it can be pushed down the road.
Yeah, so we'll keep our eyes on this and what happens next with HISD. One thing I love about Houston is that it's full of amazing stories. Here's one that I just learned about. In 1940, a girl named Ruth Steinfeld and her family were deported from Germany to one of the first Nazi concentration camps in France. She and her sister managed to escape with the help of a rescue group, and Ruth ended up making a life here in Houston. Now her portrait is part of a new exhibit called Facing Survival by David Casson. The exhibit memorializes over 24 survivors at Holocaust Museum Houston, and they really make you think about the resiliency of the human spirit. Facing Survival is on view now through January 5th at Holocaust Museum Houston, and the museum is free on Thursdays from 2 to 5 p.m., and kids 18 and under and college students are always free at Holocaust Museum Houston. Learn more at hmh.org/Facing Survival. Let's move on to the district attorney race, because for the first time since 2017, Harris County will have a new district attorney. And while the race hasn't been called just yet, as of this taping, Democratic nominee Sean Tier holds a slight lead right now over the Republican nominee Dan Simons, with 685 out of the 700 polling stations reporting. Now, this race was going to be a close one, as we discussed with Houston Landing's political reporter Paul Cobbler, and you can check out our website, houston.citycast.fm, for the latest. And the reason this was an interesting one was because from the start, Sean Tier, really made some waves. He broke away from working under the former DA Kim Ogg to run against her in the Democratic primary earlier this year. And then Dan Simons won his party's nominee with experience as a prosecutor as well. So, both guys were duking this one out, and we'll see what happens. This also highlights a lot of races here for the Democrats, because they're holding on to slim leads in other races like county attorney, tax assessor collector, while Republicans appear to be picking up some judicial seats here in Harris County.
Yeah, I think some of these countywide races, it's just we really need to see all the votes counted. It's really slim margins. I mean, the Democrats are holding on to Harris County as a blue county, but I wouldn't say like any of these are a given. No runaways here.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what the final call of this race was, especially because we have been under a Democrat district attorney for the last 7 years. So, wondering what Harris County voters will decide, and just excited to find out.
Let's talk about turnout. How were numbers looking for that, Laura?
Yeah, so I think the headline is that voter turnout in Harris County was really strong, but not quite as high as 2020. So if we look at the overall numbers, there were just over 1.5 million people who voted in Harris County, and that's slightly down from 2020 when there were 1.6 million voters. And if we break that down even more between like the election day and early voting, the turnout on election day was really big. I mean, we had over 300,000 ballots cast on election day in Harris County, and that was more than what we saw in 2020, which of course was during the pandemic. And so that's where it gets kind of interesting, because during the pandemic, we had a whole extra week of early voting with 3 weeks of early voting, whereas this time around, we only had 2 weeks. So with that, early voting was a little bit down from 2020, but still very, very strong. It was the second highest turnout on record for early voting. So I would say, overall strong turnout, really high turnout, but not quite as high as 2020 when you look at the overall numbers, or if you look at that early voting number.
Laura, one last thing on what happened in Harris County. Things were slightly different this year with how votes were being processed, right? What happened with that?
Yeah, so Harris County is kind of notoriously slow for counting ballots. And this year, we had a new elections administrator, and also they changed up the system of how these ballots were counted. So they took them first to a relay station. There were 6 relay stations set up around the county. So there was a first count there. And then they were moved to the Harris County voting count headquarters, which was at a new location, not NRG. It was at a site near the Bush Airport. And there was a second count there. So I think, I'm not quite sure if it made the count faster. Obviously, some of these races are still too close to call, but I think it did help streamline some of it, maybe improve some of the accuracy. We certainly didn't see any of these like paper ballot, running out of paper issues. So, it seems to have worked.
Very interesting. Thank you, Laura. By the way, for more election results and the latest news, head to houston.citycast.fm. Thank you so much, Brooke. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you.
Thanks, Raheel. And please subscribe and read Hey Houston for more election results.
That was Hey Houston newsletter editor Brooke Lewis and executive producer Laura Isensee. Hey, text this episode to 3 friends who care about the election results and hit subscribe so we can bring you more news and moments of joy this week and all year long. You can also sign up for our daily newsletter, Hey Houston, for our continuing coverage of this election season. And join us back here on Friday morning for more election updates at CityCast Houston. Fridays are when we break down some of the biggest local news stories of the week with some of the best and the brightest journalists and commentators in town. This week, we'll be joined by Raphael Lemaitre, and it is going to be interesting to hear him break down everything that happened with the election and so much more, and how things are going to impact our community. That will do it for today. I'm Raheel Ramzanali. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something new.